Lesson 1-5, Conditional Statements with Truth Tables. Objectives, write conditional and biconditional statements. Find the contrapositive, converse, and inverse of a conditional statement. And find truth values for conditional statements and complete truth tables. Terminology. A statement is a sentence that is either true or false. This is called the truth value, represented using letters such as P or Q. Here's an example. P is supplementary angles have a sum of 180 degrees. Well, we found out in the lesson earlier this week that that is true. Negation. A negation of a statement has the opposite truth value, and we use that with this symbol. That is a negation sign. You would read that as not P or not Q, whatever the situation is. The example below is not P. So we're using the P that's up above. Supplementary angles have a sum of 180 degrees. Here's not P. Supplementary angles do not have a sum of 180 degrees, and that would be false. Compound statements, two or more statements joined by the words and or. Conjunction is a statement joined by the word and it's written with this notation. That's P and Q. Looks like an upside down A without the line in it. It is a mathematical symbol. It's true when both statements are true. A disjunction, on the other hand, statements joined by the word or, and that is written with this symbol, that is P or Q, and that is true when at least one of the statements is true. Practice problems. Directions. Write compound statements using the statements below and determine each truth value. So P, there are 7 days in a week, which is true. It's best to try to figure out the truth value if you know the value of the P, Q, R. So let's go on to Q. March has exactly 30 days. Here's March, and that's false. March has 31 days. Halloween is on October 31st. That is true. So now let's write our compound statements. Number 1, that's going to be with an and. So we need to get P, there are 7 days in a week, and Q, March has exactly 30 days. In order to be true, they both have to be true. And you can see Q is false, so that truth value is false. Number 2, that is still an and symbol, so they both need to be true. We have Q and R, so March has exactly 30 days, and Halloween is on October 31st. Well, March has exactly 31 days is not true, so that's going to be false with and. They both have to be true. Here's another one. This is also and. This is P and R. P, there are 7 days in a week. R, Halloween is on October 31st. Both of those are true, so the truth value is true. Let's do some more. Same statements. I carried over the truth value for each one. Number 4, that is the and symbol, but look, it's not P and Q. So there are not 7 days in a week, and March has exactly 30 days. So they would both have to be true, and we just negated a true statement, so that's going to be false. Now we flip the symbol upside down, which is now going to be an or. So it's P or R. So at least one of them needs to be true. So P, there are 7 days in a week, or R, Halloween is on October 31st. That's going to be true. They both happen to be true, but we only need at least one of them to be true. Look at number 6. We're negating again. It is or. So at least one of them needs to be true, and we are negating Q. So March does not have exactly 30 days. So that's actually going to turn that to a true. Or Halloween is on October 31st. So only one of them would need to be true. They're both true. The truth value is true. Now we're negating P, and we're negating R, and there's an or, so at least one of those has to be true. So there are not 7 days in a week, or Halloween is not on October 31st. Well, neither one of those are true, so that's going to be false. We're negating again. This time we're negating P, and we are using the or. And we're negating Q. So there are not 7 days in a week, or March does not have exactly 30 days. So that will be true. Truth tables. Truth tables are a convenient way of organizing truth values of statements. Complete the following: negation, conjunction, and disjunction truth tables. So negation. If P is true and you negate it, that's going to be false. And if P is false but you negate it, it is going to be true. Conjunction is and. So they would both have to be true to be true. And if P and Q are true, that's true. The rest of them are going to be false because for a conjunction, both the P and the Q have to be true. Disjunction is or. So we need at least one true to be true. So if P is true and Q is true, it's true. If P is true and Q is false, it's still true when you're doing or, the disjunction. False and true is true, false and false is false. Terminology, conditional statements. A conditional statement is a statement that can be written in if-then form. Symbolic form is P with an arrow Q. That means P implies Q, or if P, then Q. The hypothesis is the phrase that immediately follows the if. It doesn't include the if, is the part that follows the if. The conclusion is a phrase that immediately follows the then. Does not include the then. It's after the then. So P is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. Examples. Identify the hypothesis and conclusion of the following conditional statements. If you live in Nashville, then you live in Tennessee. Hypothesis, you live in Nashville. Conclusion, you live in Tennessee. Next statement. If the sum of the measures of two angles is 90 degrees, then they are complementary angles. Hypothesis. The sum of the measures of two angles is 90 degrees. Conclusion, they are complementary angles. Number 3, if a quadrilateral is a square, then it has 4 right angles. Sometimes you have to add a word or two to make it make sense. Let's see if we need to do that on this one. Hypothesis, a quadrilateral is a square. Conclusion, it has 4 right angles. Practice problems. Writing conditional statements. Write each statement in if-then form. Number 4, an obtuse angle has a measure greater than 90 degrees. It's not an if-then form. That's what we need to do. So if an angle is obtuse, that's the beginning of that, then it has a measure greater than 90 degrees. If an angle is obtuse, then it has a measure greater than 90 degrees. Number 5, all numbers divisible by 4 are also divisible by 2. So if the number is divisible by 4, then it's also divisible by 2. Number 6, states on the East Coast border the Atlantic Ocean. So if the state is on the East Coast, then it borders the Atlantic Ocean. That's putting them conditional statements in if-then form. More terminology. We're going to be working with related conditionals, but our original conditional is P implies Q. The inverse is formed by negating both the hypothesis and conclusion. So in symbolic form, it's not P implies not Q. Converse is formed by switching the hypothesis and conclusion. So in symbolic form, there's Q implies P. Contrapositive is formed by both negating and switching the hypothesis and conclusion. So that's not Q implies not P. Practice problems. We need to write the inverse, converse, and contrapositive of the following conditional statements. Determine the truth value if false. Provide a counterexample. If it is Saturday, then there is no school. Inverse. Negate both. Keep the order the same. If it is not Saturday, then there is school. That is false because it could be Sunday. Converse, switch the order. If there is no school, then it is Saturday. That's false again because it could be Sunday. Contrapositive, you switch and negate. If there is school, then it's not Saturday, and that would be true. Biconditional statements, more terminology, definition. It's the conjunction of the conditional and its converse. There it is in symbolic form. That's P implies Q and Q implies P. Or you can write it with an arrow that goes in both directions. And you read that as P if and only if Q. Truth value. Biconditional statements are true when both conditional and converse are true. Directions. Given the biconditional statement below, write both the conditional and converse. Determine the truth value of the biconditional. Explain why it is true or false. Two angles are supplementary if and only if the sum of their measures is 180 degrees. So the conditional is going to go from the beginning to the end. So if two angles are supplementary, then the sum of their measures is 180 degrees. Converse, we're going to go the other direction. So we're going to start on the other side. If the sum of two angles measures is 180 degrees, so you got to explain what the sum is for. That's why we have to add that in. Then they are supplementary angles. Truth value, that is true because they are both true. Practice. Given the biconditional statement below, write both the conditional and converse and determine the truth value of the biconditional. Explain why it is true or false. Number 2, I wear my snow boots if and only if it snows. Conditional. If I wear snow boots, then it snows. Converse. If it snows, then I wear my snow boots. I'm pretty sure that is false because the conditional is false. Just because you wear snow boots doesn't mean it's going to snow. Mind your P's and Q's, graphic organizer, because you will need to know all of these different symbols. Part of the assignment today is, I can't remember which form I put it in, but it's explaining what each of these are. Conjunction is for and, that's P and Q. Disjunction is or, and those symbols are P or Q. Conditional, P implies Q. Inverse, same order, negate. So not P implies not Q. Converse, you're switching the order of the conditional. So Q implies P. Contrapositive, it's the same order as the converse. They both start with a con, but you're negating it. So not Q implies not P. And biconditional is the two-way arrow. It means if and only if. So P, if and only if